100 years ago, your loved one would be put into a coffin and then brought home and put on the kitchen table. You would hold a wake where everybody would come round and have drinks with the coffin in the room.
Yeah.
And tell stories. You're remembering all the good stuff and then you bury them. How we did it 100 years ago was actually better than we do it now. The loss of a child is about as difficult a thing as you'll ever have to encounter as an adult. Almost everything else pales into insignificance compared to losing a child. I was doing various TV programs where we were dealing with the death of young people, building for people who were in difficulty, and it sort of came more and more into my orbit. So the more I worked, the more I understood about Child Bereavement UK, the more I realised that actually I could learn a lot from them too. So there was an occasion where I was going to do an interview with a mother who had lost a child in the back garden of their house.
Yeah.
And then the father, under the stress of it, had died in the conservatory at the back of the house as well. So when we went to them, there was the mum and two children, surviving children, and they never looked out of the back of the house. They just couldn't go into the back of the house. They couldn't look into the back garden. And we were going to change the whole layout of everything so that it was a new start, so that they could come to terms with that. But it was such a dramatic situation and an interview that I was going to do with a mum that I then consulted Child Bereavement UK and got some advice from their counsellors on how to go about that interview. Over the years, I've learned a lot how to do those kind of things, but more advice is always helpful. And then later on when we did Grenfell, for example, when we built at Grenfell, one of the interesting things there were that people who'd been affected by loss of family members were granted, I think it was 5 counselling sessions. But when that was done, that was it. Whether you were doing better or not, that was the allowance. Yeah. So when we built the place at Grenfell under the M40 there, we built in counselling rooms of different sizes, little rooms for people to do one-on-one.
Community spaces.
Community spaces within what we were building. We built a kitchen, we built an area where people could get together for events. We built a gym for the young people because that's what they told us, a boxing gym, because that was what was really important to keep the kids off the street in that area, and it was really important to the area. So we took advice from the families about what they needed us to build. But these counselling rooms are really important, but there's no point in having the counselling rooms if you don't have the allocation. So I went back to Child Bereavement UK, and with them we were able to make sure that not only were we providing them with the rooms to do that, but with Child Bereavement UK as well. And the more I got involved with them, the more it became apparent how important it was. So I teamed up with them and accepted a role as patron.
That's fantastic. I think, again, like you said, like the 5 sessions, and this really interests me because like something happens and then we react as a nation and society. And again, what we talked about off air was about bereavement awareness in schools, about how it can help, and actually about how this becomes part of life. So it's about having a support network around you all the time. You know, when things are good and bad, knowing that where the support is. What do you think about that?
What happens to you when you lose a loved one is different for everybody that loses somebody. And it can have all kinds of unexpected effects. So tailoring what a person needs can be very different person to person. So the idea of a blanket, you can have 5 sessions. It makes no sense at all, really. And if I give some examples, we at one stage we built a house in the countryside for a guy who was formerly a fireman, who'd been invalided out after falling through a staircase in a fire, and had rescued many people and had terrible things to do, pulling children that had died in fires and so on and so forth. But he lost his wife and was left with a daughter and a house that they were doing up but he couldn't do. So we were able to do the house for him, but what was interesting was that the secondary thing, the loss of his wife, set off like a PTSD reaction to the things that he had seen previously. It's almost like your brain can take so much, and then another incident will overload and will trigger. And so he was really, I'm an incredibly brave man and was just holding it together, but he would say things like, I take my daughter to school and then I'll sit on a chair rocking all day until I go and pick her up again. And there's a specific kind of help that he needs that isn't the same kind of help as a child needs who's just lost their mother, or a mother that's just lost her child. So individually tailoring those things is really important, but it's also incredibly difficult because the money isn't around in government and local government to be able to provide those services that there were before. And whilst we all believe the world should be a better place where everybody can, the fact of the matter is you have to be realistic about these things and go, well, the money's not going to suddenly appear that it hasn't been there for ages. It's just not. You always hope that a change of government or a change of attitude might actually make the difference, but the fact of the matter is that money's tight, so charities step in and do that work very often. You know, if you think about I always say about the National Health Service, if it wasn't for, every hospital around the country has got an MRI machine or something that was bought by local people raising money. There's a cancer unit that I know of in a hospital that was practically built by the fundraising of one person that I know who works in the industry and has raised something like 10 million over years. So that involvement has always been there, that community involvement has always been there. And I think when we lived in villages, and there was a bereavement or a difficulty or somebody had a house burned down or something like that, the community would gather around, help rebuild the house, would take up the slack and hold. And actually, a good example of that was another build that we did for a chap who'd lost his wife and he had 5 kids. And while sitting talking to him, he said, I wish it had been me and she'd have stayed because she knows what to do and I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's just heartbreaking to hear. But his community, his friends, people who lived in the village were taking the washing to help, were cooking meals and dropping them off.
Yeah.
That community being able to step in and lighten the load gives him the space to be able to get by, but then he's got to deal with getting his head right and around it. And I think, interestingly, I've come to the conclusion over the years that we're not very good at death in the UK. And actually, how we did it 100 years ago was actually better than we do it now.
Yeah. So this all comes back to what we talk about on the podcast frequently about how we create connection in life and in death. And it appears to me like what you do is like you create communities and connection in the work around the TV programs you do. Because what you're doing as well, it appears to be like very sensitive work. I mean, have you received training on how to look after these people who are in these really, really vulnerable positions?
No, it's a really interesting thing that I haven't had any formal training, but there's no doubt that years ago I used to do a program called City Hospital where we followed people through cancer treatment, children through operations and cancer operations, and actually understanding how to tiptoe through those stories, those life stories, those which are not stories for the people in them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And you get asked all the usual question, which is like, well, why are you invading their privacy when they're in such a difficult time? And it's like very often the parents actually having someone to talk to about it, recording it, gives them 2 things. One, if they lose their child, God forbid, they have a record of their child and a visual record and a connection. There's things they can look at.
Yeah.
On the plus side, if the child does well and recovers, it's a great story and it's reinforcing for anybody else whose child is going through those processes as well. So brave of them to say, yes, we'll record this, because as tough as it is for us, and if we can actually vocalise what we're going through, that will help somebody else. And if nothing else comes out of this, people will understand the process because you've documented it and we've talked about how we feel in the moment. But you have a responsibility in that, and that responsibility is really serious and one that I've taken very seriously. And I'll give you an example. When we were doing City Hospital, I was following the process with a child who had liver cancer. She went in for an operation which was supposed to be 5 or 6 hours, ended up being sort of 12, 13 hours. I was sat with the family. And we'd arranged that when the child was in intensive care the next day, that live in the programme we would come to me, the parents had said they would like to talk to us, and that I would speak to them live on TV. And I was stood in intensive care and the parents were there by the cot. And the director, the other presenter, sending it over to Nick Knowles, who's in intensive care, to catch up on, I won't say the child's name. And I was watching them whilst they were doing this. And I actually said to camera, live on camera, we're not going to talk to them. I'm not going to interrupt them. I'm not going to talk to them now. They did agree that we could talk to them this morning, but it's not the right time. I can see it's not the right time.
Things have changed now. Yeah.
It just feels different. And if you don't mind, I'm not going to talk to them today, and we'll see if we can talk to them tomorrow. One of the execs that was connected was very upset with me afterwards. But what was really interesting, because we'd had agreement to do it, and it was a critical moment, the flood of emails and letters and people saying how lovely to see somebody not doing it.
Yeah.
So reading the moment, and in amongst TV, you have to push for the story. You have to represent. We know that in the long run it can help people, but you also have to hold on to your human being head, where you say this just doesn't feel right.
Being humane, isn't it?
Being just, would I be in this circumstance? Would it be okay? We had another one where the family were a child who was 10 or 11 was having difficulty with bedwetting. There was an operation that would stop it, and we'd got agreement with the family and everybody else that we would cover this. And in the meeting in the morning, I said, we're not doing this. They went, why not? I said, because this program will be recorded, it will go out now, and that's fine if the parents have said now. But in 5 years' time, if it gets repeated, that child will be 15, 16, and will be at school, and it will come out that they were bedwetting and they had to have an operation.
Well done.
It's not human. It's not.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be doing this, and I won't do it. And actually, the producers then went, do you know what? I thought that. Absolutely right. We won't do it. And the people I worked with on City Hospital, which was the program I did, were incredibly good at that. Were incredibly human and absolutely solid on that. And it was a real pleasure to work with. And most people in television are, if we get time to think things through and be honest about things.
But I suppose what you do is quite reactive, and it needs that sort of calm head in the heat of the moment to step back and go, actually...
You just have to hold on to your humanity.
Yeah, it doesn't feel quite right.
You have to be real about being a human being on top of chasing a story. And part of the reason I left news in the end was because those lines can get blurred in order to get the story.
So I'm interested in you because all the work that you do, Children in Need, other charities you're involved in as well, and support, there appears to be like a pull, and there's sort of a real depth to why you're involved and why you want to serve and help society. What is it? What's happened, or was there an experience in your life that's really triggered this in helping other people?
I think it's an accumulation of things, really. One is that the background I come from. I grew up on a council estate in West London, and I don't come from a middle class or a wealthy background, and I came out of a situation where it was highly unlikely that I got to do what I do. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and in the process of that, I have a bit of a platform. And so where I have the opportunity, I will try and represent the kind of communities I come from. It's interesting, so when I was talking to the people at Grenfell, and they were saying, one of them said to me, we didn't realise we were deprived until news people came up and told us. Because actually it was a vertical village.
Yeah, their community.
Yeah,
it's their space. Yeah,
but people are coming, this deprived living in these, and they're like, hang on a second, who are you calling deprived?
Yeah.
We have a really lovely, multicultural, interactive, fantastic. We love where we live, and I loved where I grew up. They were playing 45-a-side football on the green at the end of our road by the canal.
Yeah.
Going jumping in the canal, which never jump in the canal. Anybody who's thinking about it, kids shouldn't jump in the canal, but we were told not to, and we did anyway. But really just humble upbringing, but nonetheless, so part of it is that. And then finally, probably the death of my father made a big difference in that respect about how I go about doing what I do and the things that I choose to do to try and give a voice to people who might not get that opportunity another way.
And if you're comfortable in discussing it, how old were you when your father passed away?
I was very lucky. I was in early 30s, so...
Still young though.
Yes, but I'm also I'm very glass half full in life anyway. And actually, I think you said you lost your mum young.
I was 12 when she died.
There you go. I mean, how much more devastating? It's always devastating to lose a parent. And actually, when my mum died some 10 years later, I remember standing at the graveside with my brother and saying to him, "We're orphans." Yeah. Now I'm 44 at that stage, and my brother's like 49, 50. There is a sense that the
protection.
Well, also the greater power that you refer to, even if you don't ask them any questions anymore, but they are the authority you refer to.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden you don't have that authority anymore, and you're out in the world on your own.
Yeah.
And you've got to be the make the decisions, and you've got no. And I struggled with that for a little while. And also, my dad got very ill for the last 2 years of his life. So he had several heart attacks during the course of his life. The last thing was a stroke, and then he was in had to go into a care home to be looked after. And the stroke had affected his mind and his emotions. So he's very stoical, sort of very British, old school. I mean, things like with my fiance, I'll always walk on the outside of the pavement to have her walk on the inside. You know, I walk in on the steps in front of her when I go down steps, and I'm behind her. All those old things, you know, opening the door. Opening the door is the most obvious one, but there's all these other things as well. Sort of old-fashioned values, and I'm constantly being accused of being old-fashioned in the way I go about those things. They all come from my dad. And then suddenly with the stroke, he was very emotional, would cry, and I found that incredibly difficult. So I didn't visit him when he was in the care home as much as I should have done in the last year of his life. And then he passed away. Yeah. And I had this moment of realisation that I'd let him down at the most difficult time in his life by not being able to handle it. So that took me a long time. And then I was very upset. Every time I thought of him, it made me really upset. And then about 3 months in, I remember thinking to myself, this is just awful. I love my dad. I enjoyed his company. We had great times together. And every time I think of him, it makes me sad. I've got to switch this around because I want to think of him as smart. I want to think of him and make me remember all the good times, all the amazing things, the fun things. I made a conscious effort to do that, and it's really massively empowering to be able to think. And I always think of my dad, and it makes me smile now. From that point onwards, and it's advice I give people quite a lot now when they lose somebody is if you can find a way to. We get caught in the last part of people's lives. Yeah. So if you have a year of illness at the end, or my mum was very ill at the end, and it's really difficult because she went through a really tough time in the last 3 months. And the question then is, do we remember the 3 months of her suffering? Yeah. Or do we remember the 48, 50 years I had of her being my mum and all the good times? And if you get caught in that end bit, this is where I think I said to you at the start of this, I think we used to do death a lot better 100 years ago. 100 years ago is the weirdest thing, and to think about it now is the toughest thing for us to think about in the way that we treat death now. But 100 years ago, your loved one would be put into a coffin and then brought home and put on the kitchen table. And you would hold, I come from an Irish background, you would hold a wake where everybody would come round and have drinks with the coffin in the room and tell stories. You're remembering all the good stuff and then you bury them.
Yeah. It's connection again though. Now we've moved, that society has moved into a more clinical way of dying. It's even that contact with our loved ones. Some people now don't see the loved ones at all. Yeah. There's rise now, this direct cremation where the coffin is taken straight from a hospital to a crematorium and the families don't even see their loved one. There's no contact whatsoever, no funeral. So this is like a more exaggerated version of what you're saying though, and like what we used to have was constant like flow of connection with our loved ones. So it wasn't based on a period of time, but it's based on a whole life.
Yes, it's a reset. The job I told you about, a build that we did for the woman who had lost her daughter. Yeah. She insisted on having her daughter brought home from the hospital. Yeah. And stayed with her daughter in the house for, I think it was 4 days before the funeral. And everybody thought this was the weirdest thing in the world. And actually, when she told me, I was like, it's different. That's different. That's odd, actually. And she said, my daughter had never been anywhere on her own. Never been without me or someone she loved or someone that we knew would look after her, ever. Why would I now leave her alone in a hospital for 4 days? So I brought her home, and she said, and that really helped before we had the funeral.
And that's creating connection, and that's what I keep saying on this podcast. And actually, I believe that lady, I'm guessing, because I don't know the lady, but I would hope now she's in a better place with her grief because of the actions that she did at that time in creating connection with her loved one.
Yes.
That's what we need to really highlight in society.
We're not in any way suggesting that suddenly everything was okay because
of course not.
Massive grief and massive struggle to come to terms with it.
But it's the actions we do now, though, it can help us in the future. I'm looking at now your grief, but tomorrow with your grief, but also where you're going to be in 5 years' time with your grief. That's what really interests me. That's what I believe we can improve.
Yeah.
And I think we've got mental health issues rising now in the UK. I think it's all connected to the levels of disconnect in society, and that comes into all walks of life. COVID, people staying at home all the time now, not going out shopping. It's convenient, but actually, humans, I believe, are meant to be around humans. I don't think it's healthy just to be isolated. It's not good for your health.
Let me give you another example, because the more I've learned about this, the more it became apparent that that actually creating that connection, creating that mind change is critically important. I had an incredibly close friend and his wife, close friends, and their son, who was a floor manager. We all worked in TV. And he passed away unexpectedly. And 2 days after he passed away, I went to visit them. And it was the son's 21st birthday. And I spent the day with them. And then in the evening, I said, right, to the son, right, come on, we're going out. And he said, what do you mean we're going out? I said, we're going out to celebrate your 21st birthday. So I can't celebrate my 21st birthday. My dad's just died. I said, if there's one thing I know about your father, he would be furious, because he was such a great guy, that you weren't doing this. So we are going out, and I've rung up a whole load of the cameramen and people that we work with, and we're all going to meet down in town. And his mum was like, yeah, well, you should go. Anyway, we all met in town. We stopped off. I got him a beer. We sat down with the rest of them. I went off to the loo. When I came back, they were all sat there, all like quiet. This is not the point. Okay, I'm going to start. I'm going to tell you a story about your dad, and we're all going to take turns and tell, because he was such an amazing character. We're all going to tell you stories about your dad, and we sat there and told amazing stories all evening, and genuinely laughed about the things that had happened. Yeah. Ended up getting quite drunk, and you know,
perfect.
Went through the process. Almost had an old-fashioned wake, but in the process told amazing stories through that, and actually. It was really, I think that kind of thing is the thing that somehow we've lost. And actually, added to that, my friend his wife, who's just a brilliant human being, she was saying that 2 days after after he died, she got a knock on the front door and opened the front door. And the well-meaning people had turned up and said, hi, we're from the local bereavement service, and, you know, we've come here to say that, you know, if you'd like to talk to us. And she said, oh, off and slammed the door in their face, because what you don't actually want is people being hand-wringingly. Do you know what I mean?
What I was going to say was,
because we're all frightened of talking about it, and you shouldn't be.
That night with the beers and discussing his dad, what you did there, I think, is more powerful than a counselling session. I think so. You're together. That's what we used to have. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure why we've lost it. We stopped the wakes for some reason. I mean, the idea of having the loved one come home into the house has gone. I mean, if you remember, the funeral service used to come down and collect the body from the house. And then put it in the hearse and then carry on. That was the old-fashioned way. Because I was talking to my dad about this years ago, and some of my aunts and uncles, and they'd say, yeah, you'd have the body back. In fact, he said, you know, with the Irish families, you get to the point where you'd all be put, and you'd have drinks. You'd stand drinks on the coffin whilst you were all talking and telling great jokes and singing. And in Ireland, that's still the case, but it's sort of in England now, Wales, Scotland, we're kind of losing that now.
I think the key to that is that you are resetting your mind away from the last few weeks or months of suffering into remembering what an amazing human being they were. There's another example. I was at a sporting event, and we got chatting to this couple. It was like they had a picnic in the boot at this thing, and they said, "Oh, do you want a glass of wine?" I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "It's our anniversary on Sunday," and I was like, "Oh, well, congratulations." She said, "Well, we don't really celebrate anymore." I was like, "Why not?" She said, "Well, because my mum passed away 2 years ago, the day before my wedding anniversary." So I said, so you don't ever celebrate your wedding anniversary anymore? She said, no, it's just too painful. That time of year is too painful. And I found it very difficult to move on. And I said, if I could, and forgive me for saying so, but if I could bring your mum back for like 15 minutes and asked her, is it okay that you don't celebrate your wedding anniversary anymore and that you have a weekend of unhappiness? What do you think she'd say to you? And she'd say, well, she'd tell me, like, I should get on with it. And like, actually, part of you being a parent, as a job as a parent, I think we're all obsessed these days with as a parent as being best friends with their children. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Part of it is actually trying to build your children to the point where they are capable of being an individual, living in the real world, holding down a job, forming friendships with people.
Yeah.
And if you have to say no or be slightly disciplinarian about that to get them to that stage, that's the more important part of the job. With that comes a degree of, if I have done my job rightly for my children, they will not stall when I die.
I totally agree.
And if you stall, it's almost slightly disrespectful to your parents that you're not getting on with it in the way that they brought you up to be. So and I know that's really harsh. And people will absolutely hammer me for it because everybody's experience is different. And I understand for some people the grief is unbelievably difficult. And age, when you lose your parents, is a big thing too. But I think at the heart of it is this sense of parents bring up children to be able to carry on without their guidance.
Yeah, I've got 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, and already, you know, my kids are 6 and 4. I'm not saying that they should be fine now if something was to happen to me, but as adults, I want them to be not reliant on me. That's not me saying that I'm kind of just, you know, keep me away from your kids. I want to be I'm totally involved. I'm with them all the time, but actually, I have a responsibility to make strong, independent people. So when something does go wrong, they're okay. And actually they're okay on their own because they're strong individuals, resilient individuals. So yeah, I think that's another conversation for another day.
No, but you know, it's all part of that whole process, isn't it? People stall when they lose somebody.
Yeah.
And that's difficult, and for many, many reasons. And it, you know, I'm not God knows I've been through enough stories and bereavements and people and environments with people. Some of them take that energy and turn it into something else.
Yeah.
You know, you'll find that with a child that has a serious disability or a life-limiting illness, the mums become more knowledgeable than surgeons.
Yeah.
And spend their whole time searching for any possibility of anything anywhere around them. These are generalisations. The fathers will quite often find themselves slightly emasculated by that situation, don't quite know what to do because you have to you're there to protect and provide in an overall sense. And you feel sort of emasculated by the fact you're handing your children over to medics all the time. You can't do it. So quite often what they'll do is they'll beast themselves in one way by canoeing around England or running ultra marathons or to raise money to do you know what I mean?
Yeah, compensating almost.
Yes, what compensation I will do myself. And then afterwards with a loss, so very often for many people, we know the relationship between mental health and exercise, actually beasting themselves to raise money for the particular cause that took their child. So all of these are parts of the process of dealing with death. But I think at the heart of it, the thing that I've noticed most is that we have lost the way of processing the loss and getting into our minds. It's difficult with children. I mean, like children, I don't know how I support it because I don't know how you
said right at the start, it's the worst thing that can happen, and I agree. I've got 3 young children, and I'm not sure how I would operate if something was to happen to one of them. Yeah. So I think it is the worst thing that can happen. Moving forward in a different direction, so you've also got close affiliation to the veterans as well, military veterans, and providing support and other community spaces for them. Could you go on to talk about the work you do with them, please?
That often surprises me because I'm not ex-military myself.
Yeah.
My father was in the RAF.
Yeah.
I'm quite old now, and I'm actually very old now. And my dad was quite old when he had me. So actually, he flew Hurricanes in the Second World War in the Middle East and around Palestine and that sort of area there, Egypt. So there was some military background in that respect, but he wasn't in it long after the war either. He sort of came out a couple of years after the war. But again, there is a defining moment for me. I went along to a thing called the Millies, which is the Sun used to hold this thing, which is an award ceremony for military. And I remember seeing a particular veteran receiving a standing ovation and receiving a Millie Award, who had been quite severely injured in service in Afghanistan, I think. And it struck me that this evening he was getting the adulation and the award and all the other things, and that was great. But he's 22 years old and he's got the rest of his life in front of him where people go off and live their lives.
Yeah.
And
in 10 years' time, different story kind of thing.
So what is the support mechanism to make sure that he has the support he needs from there on in? So I started asking questions about that and moving around, and got involved with an amazing guy called Ed Parker, Walking with the Wounded. And we started talking about what we might be able to do for veterans as they were drawing down from Iraq and Afghanistan. And so the whole idea came up of building an entire street of houses in Manchester.
Wow.
Actually, it was in any city that seemed appropriate, but Manchester were brilliant in how they facilitated us being able to do that. And we ended up doing an entire street in Manchester for veterans, and which now has, I think it was something like 32 houses out of 64, because there were also other civilian houses where people were living. And when we did the rebuild, we wanted to make sure that not only did we do all these houses up for veteran families, but also we wanted to put new things in, render the building, make the houses better for the other people as well.
Yeah.
So that you didn't get just an influx of veterans and the others go, oh, well, they've got great new houses and we haven't. So we wanted to make sure that worked. But also in terms of, I think it's really important that when you work for veterans that it became the more I dealt with the mental health of people that were coming out of the forces. What you don't, it's like people quite often say, we should be taking these old air bases and turning them into veterans villages. But actually, you don't want to create a veterans enclave.
Yeah.
What you need is introduction to Civvy Street.
Yeah, not isolation.
Not isolation, and not even keeping to the same. This is one of the difficulties we found with transferring people into the workplace with veterans, is that it's this sense of turning up on time and how annoying it is if you don't, or not doing what you say you will do. Now in Civvy Street, everybody does that. Like all the time, you go, oh, I'll do that, and then they don't do it, or I'll be there. I've got a mate who's a former SAS, and I'll ring him up and say, you fancy a pie this week? And he go, I'll meet you at 7 in such and such a pub in Bristol. I go, okay. I can guarantee you 2 minutes past 7, my phone will go. He go, are you not coming? I go, I'm a civilian. I'll get there when I get there.
See, I agree with you, mate. That's the thing. I'm with you. I'm with him.
Exactly. Of course, all people that have been in the services have. And so that understanding that they're not personally insulting you when people do that kind of thing is actually, and I'm not even joking, veterans have walked off jobs because people haven't kept their word. And you've got to make them understand. Standards, yes, but you can't hold civilians who haven't been through that to the same standards that you have. You can hope for it, you can get there, but you can't lose your own job because you're standing on those kind of principles too hard. So it's a development thing. But it became apparent we could do more and more. And actually, if we were going to build the street, then we ought to be with people living in houses. So yes, you can go and have a brew or a wet or whatever your particular part of the armed forces calls it, with the bloke next door. And we made sure that there were people putting chairs outside so you could sit outside and have a cup of tea. But also, you could walk across the road to the other bloke who's not ex-military and talk about the football or fishing or anything else, and everybody joined in. Integration, and what we did as well, we put an office in the street that was basically to help the veterans get jobs, but they also helped everybody else in the street if they wanted the help as well, if they weren't veterans. That way you create an integrated, and like for years after, when I went up to Manchester, I used to drive and just park at the end of the street, and you see the kids on the bicycles, and we made it like home zoned as well, which is like narrow. You can get the cars down it, but you have to go very slow because of get round the trees and things that we planted in the street. You see the kids out on the bicycles and kicking a football around, people sat in twos and walking across the street and having a chat, and just that is almost like 100 years ago.
Just to feel it almost, feel that community space.
Yeah, and just like learning things like, for example, in the first 2 shows that we did one for somebody who was physically injured, who'd lost 3 limbs, and the second with somebody who was suffering with PTSD. So that in the 2 programs we could represent. Now, you make that program about PTSD or about injuries in the armed forces and put it on BBC One, it might get 1 million viewers. Because of it was the SOS and had all of the things that people go along with that, it helped that William and Harry turned up at the same time all those years ago together to join in without any shadow of a doubt. But we ended up 8 and 9 million viewers. Now we've got 8 or 9 million people learning about PTSD, learning about the difficulties veterans are facing, without doing an entire program about it and ramming it down their throats. But just genuine conversations with people, and so you get a greater understanding. So that's kind of what I realised I could do in these environments, was create a narrative that was easily palatable. You could sit down with your family and watch a program.
Not too heavy.
You're going to laugh a bit. You're going to be amazed by the build that we do. You're going to look at the finish and go, oh my gosh, isn't that amazing? You're going to see the builders, the 1,000 builders that took part, crying as they're listening to the veterans going, I didn't believe anybody cared this much about us. And that tells a story. I always say that the thing about the builds we do, it's good for the people we build for, obviously. It's great for the people who build because they suddenly realise they can use their skills and they can change people's lives, and that's amazing for them. But also for everybody else who's in the same situation, you sit there and you go, oh, do you know people do care?
Yeah.
And again, I get criticised, okay, well, people only do it to be on TV. 90% of the people who take part in our builds don't make it onto TV. Or they do it for the advertising. They're not allowed to advertise that they took part. So it's a fantastically altruistic thing, but it reminds people that community is good. There are more good people than bad.
Yeah.
And that if we go forward and support each other, we can help each other deal with all of these things. Building houses for people who need houses is a bit like the Amish raising a barn.
Yeah.
The way we do it.
Yeah.
Get everybody together in a short amount of time, get this done for people who really need it.
Fantastic.
100 years ago in villages, people would have done this anyway.
Yeah.
We're just and you said, we do this. Really important, earlier on you said it, and I must have interrupted you at the time. We, the OSOS, the 15 of us that are involved in the programme that turn up, haven't built any of this.
Yeah.
It's built by the community in the area we go to, and we've done 300 builds. And
so like you say, it's it used to happen in communities, villages, like you said, you'd get together, build these spaces for people who are struggling as well. But now you are the facilitator of the communities doing this, what they used to always do.
Yeah.
But now it's being recorded on BBC or on TV.
It's a little gravity ball. It's we're a little catalyst.
Yeah.
And because over a period of, we've been doing this 25th year doing it this year. So people trust us that if we're doing it for somebody, they deserve it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of suspicion about whether people deserve stuff or not. If we're doing it,
there's a reason for it.
There's a reason for it.
No, it's fantastic what you do.
And the chance to do that for the military who have served their country, and if you come back from having served your country, the least you should expect is somewhere to live and an opportunity.
Yeah.
Not a gift, not charity, an opportunity.
Yeah. With your late father, did he see the work you were doing with the veterans?
No.
What do you think he'd say about all the work you've done for the veterans? And just in general, everything you're doing? I think as men, we're always seeking the approval of our fathers, even after they've gone. Yeah. Possibly.
And even when they're here, somebody said to me the other day, with your sons as well, they're always trying to step out from under a shadow you're trying your hardest not to cast.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's always that dynamic going on. I think I did it because I changed what I was doing because of what happened with my dad and the fact that I wasn't good enough about being with my dad at the end. And so my direction was to represent as many different causes, if you like. Stroke was the one that for my dad, but I didn't want to just do stroke. I wanted to try and give a voice or a platform. So SOS, for example, when we do those builds, many different types of illnesses or problems or situations or as many as we possibly can. So if we do 3 veterans, we won't do another veteran for a while because we sort of shun a spotlight onto that. And we will lots of other. The biggest difficulty we have is actually turning people down because we can only do so many builds a year. But that's the way it is. I did it probably because of him, but I don't think I don't know what he'd make of it really. I think he'd be pleased and proud. I mean, he'd have given away his last penny anyway.
Yeah.
He was always somebody who would, he'd give away his last penny rather than do anything for himself. So, from that point of view, I think that would be because my brother is a musician and he does a lot of mental health counselling through music.
Okay.
He plays for all kinds of charities free of charge. He does, he absolutely has the same sort of thing. And there are other people that do what we've been doing. I mean, there's a mate of mine, Ken Hames, who's a former SAS. Well, I don't think you say former, do you? He's but anyway, SAS. Yeah. And he's gathered people together and got them to build their own homes. Military. He's done this 5-6 times.
Just off air.
He's just done it brilliant. I mean, local news covers it and things like that. But he's done that without all the benefits that I've had of a TV programme and all about, people like him and people like that around the country doing this kind of thing. Hull for Heroes, what they're doing up there. Rugby for Heroes, the guys who get people who are struggling after coming out of the military and get them their rugby training, coaching tickets so that then they can become part of a rugby community and go from a unit where they had 500 mates who relied on each other and respected each other, to out of the military, none of that exists anymore, feeling a bit lost, to becoming a coach in a rugby club where they've got 350 people who are looking up to them, and again, gives them some sense of that, gets their own self-respect, health, fulfillment, and leads them into a better way of life. So all of these things where we can find a way to give people a purpose.
A sense of direction as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And I've fallen into that at various stages in my life where things haven't been going well and you lose your sense of purpose. And you need sometimes someone you love to give you a kick and go, where's your sense of purpose gone? And and be strong about it and say so. So, and I'm eternally grateful to the people that I love who have said that to me and got me out of my funk and got me started thinking positively. And not everybody has that,
That network around them. No, it's been fascinating to learn about you and to learn about why you do the things you do, because it's very clear you're more than just a presenter. There's a deep-rooted connection you have with communities and society to help and assist, and I keep using the word on this now, is you are a facilitator, in my view, of making good things and positive things happen for society. So
I hope so. But then by the same token, as people used to say to me, oh, you're wonderful, and I go, I tell you what, film anyone for 10 days and edit them into an hour, everybody looks wonderful.
Okay,
I've got irritating...
No, well, no one's perfect.
There's irritating bits, and I'm, not this massively altruistic person, but I think if you can have a drive through the middle of where you go, doing City Hospital was a direct choice because that gave me the opportunity to talk about that and the amazing people that work in hospitals and what they do.
It's also as well for you, it's the option to learn about the environments you're in.
Oh yeah,
that's a key part of this as well.
Yeah.
And you've obviously taken and extracted from these places, and you've developed from that as well. Yeah,
and for someone who talks so much, actually knowing when to shut up and listen, where you can learn from people.
Yeah,
and giving people the space to be able to. So you learn other things as well. Like we were talking about bereavement and how to deal with things. If I'm going to talk to a woman about a loss, I will sit opposite her like this, and you hold eye contact and you talk. If I'm going to talk to a man about a loss, I will sit next to him and we'll both stare out into the distance. We'll sit on a bench and look out.
That's interesting.
Men don't face each other. You do this in an interview situation.
Yeah.
This is not, if you want to get the best out of somebody who's suffered a difficulty, you don't eyeball them. Not with men. You sit next to them and you stare out into the middle distance, like you do at a bar. Yeah. That's why men sit at bars and look out.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And will suddenly say, I'm having a terrible time of it at the moment, and you go, oh yeah, I was like, but they're not going to sit. I'm not going to sit and look at you, in the eyeball. You don't. People don't do it.
That's a fair point, actually. Yeah.
So you learn those things. You learn body language as well. In interviews with people, if I sit open because I'm confident, and you're like this, and we start the interview, I look really comfortable, and you feel even more uncomfortable because you're nervous and unworried.
Yeah. Subconscious communication, isn't it, as well?
Yeah. So I will quite often start an interview with my legs and arms crossed, and then slowly start to uncross.
Once you relax.
As we go in. And I'll also I will deliberately make a couple of mistakes and go, I made a mess of it. Sorry, can we just do that again?
Just to ease you into it all.
Because I want you to know that we're not this perfect, and also television is a terrible thing. We come in, we put up lights, we point cameras at everybody in this unnatural situation, and then the director goes, try and pretend we're not here.
How can I avoid that?
Like this massive thing staring at us all over, the lights. I mean, here, you haven't got this, it's a lovely sunny day, unusually. But we put lights up and things to make sure that we can see the people properly. Yeah. Then how do you get that person out of that environment? With women, when I'm interviewing them, again, big generalisations, we can do this, and as long as we keep talking, and the first 4 or 5 questions will be nothing to do with what we're talking about, really, just general chit-chat.
Ease into it, yeah.
Ease into it. With men, quite often, I will sit side by side, like you'd sit here next to me, we'd look out this way, and I'd have a camera about 20 yards away over there on a long lens, and one on a long lens over there, and one maybe over there on a long lens, so that they're not right in our faces. Yeah. And we can look at the trees and the countryside and the lorry going past, and
more relaxed.
You've got to understand how to give people. My job is not to go, hello, look at me. My job is to say, hello, look at them. Yeah. And I've got to facilitate the person I'm talking to being having the best opportunity to tell their truth.
The focal point as well.
Yeah. And so everything we do is about making that person feel comfortable enough. And the other thing is, like, how am I ever going to know what the question is to ask somebody who's lost a child?
Yeah.
I'm not, am I?
It's back to what we said before about being humane, reading the situation, the people, their emotional state, isn't it? And then you adapt accordingly to what they need.
Because we're talking about death and dealing with death, and I'll give you one last example. I did when I was doing a City Hospital, this hospital-based program. Somebody from palliative care came and said, "Would you come and do some pieces in palliative care? Because there's a woman she's in her 30s, and she'd like to be on the program." I was like, "Okay, what's the background?" And she said, "Well, she was given an end of life time, which was 2 months ago." And she's pretty angry at the situation, but she wants to do an interview. So I said to the production company, I was like, doing this thing. They went, "I don't think that's going to work on a daytime TV program. It's like palliative care is somebody who should have died by now." So let me go and do the recording and
see how it goes.
See the interview and see how it goes. And I won't promise her anything. I'll tell the truth. The night before, I remember laying awake to the early hours of the morning, thinking, how do you talk to somebody who's definitely dying? What do you ask that doesn't sound brutal? Can you ask really tough questions, or what do you? And next morning, all the way there, all I could think about was really quiet, unusually quiet for me. Anyway, we sat down, and it suddenly occurred to me as I sat down in front of her what I should ask first. And the question is, what can I ask you?
Yeah.
And she said, "I want to talk about anything and everything." And I went, "Okay, are you sure?" And she went, "Yes." I went, "Okay, do you go to bed at night worrying that you might not wake up in the morning?" And she said, "Do you?" Not really, sir, because you could get hit by a bus when you leave this interview and die before me. And I was like, it's a very good point. Yeah. And actually, she was unbelievably inspiring and interesting. And then I did a whole series of films in palliative care that were just extraordinary. Wow. Extraordinary. And putting it out on daytime BBC, and we were getting letters from people saying, "I've been diagnosed with cancer. I'm sitting in my room. I haven't moved out of my room for 2 months. I've just seen the interview. I'm going to go out and do this, and I'm going to go out and do that."
It inspired people to start living their lives properly. Why do we wait until terminal illness until we start living our true lives?
Just interviewed a guy. I went down and did a film in Patagonia. You'll see it in the program when the program was out soon on Patagonia. There's a guy in his 20s diagnosed with a terminal illness. So he gave up his job working in banking in Paris to cycle the length of South America. I met him down in Patagonia when he was on it. Amazing. And he was meeting people along the way who were suffering with the diagnosis that he had. And we were sat at the end, having done a bit of cycling together, and we were sat there, and I was saying, it's amazing the adventure of the people that you've met along the way and what you've done and your response to your diagnosis. And he said, "Yeah, but he said everybody should be doing this." He said, "Why do you have to wait for a terminal diagnosis before you start living your life?"
Yeah.
And it's just, and like, you don't hear that from anybody unless they're in extreme. And then you go, "You're right, I should be going for this. And that thing I always wanted to do, I should go and do."
Go and do it. Nick, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating. I've really enjoyed my time with you. I'm grateful for that as well, thank you. And yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. A huge thank you for watching our podcast, Death, A Changing Industry. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as we have some fascinating guests lined up. Thank you so much.